October, and you also have this new round of transport price increases, not just for jeepneys, but now covering buses, taxis, grab cars.
6 out of 10 Filipinos are concerned about rising prices of commodities. According to the latest Pulse Asia survey, 66% of survey respondents identified inflation as the most urgent national concern.
Kahit anong sigurong sipag, hindi na obra. Kasi sa taas ng bilihin, wala na po, hindi na makakaipon. Gusto ko nga sana may pag-ipon, maghulog sana ako ng isang daan bawat araw, pero hindi ko na nahulugan.
Yung pump prices, gasoline and diesel, ito ay unang apektuhan. Plus, of course, magkakaroon ito ng impact sa transport. Nakikita rin namin na nagkakaroon sila ng mga spillover effects sa iba pang mga subgroups, particular nga yung pagkain.
Inflation, the peso, fuel prices, national debt, the numbers are not very comforting for the Marcos administration. Almost 100 days into office is government's game plan to revive the economy gaining momentum. We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Kasama ko po sa studio dito sa Mandaluyong Lingao of One News. Tapos online, kasama natin si Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Chiefs, good evening.
Good evening.
Happy Thursday.
Ami, lumabas ng ang Pulse Asia survey for the first 100 days of President Marcos. What are the headline numbers there?
Siyempre, yung inflation ang #1 concern at mukhang hindi maligaya ang mga tao. The way the government is dealing with it, mababa yung score niya ron.
Parang dalawa yung headlines na naglabasa. Two competing headlines. I mean, in general, out of 11 of 13 concerns and key issues, mataas naman yung approval rating for President Marcos. Yung dalawa, net negative, no? Lowest, but those two, as you pointed out, inflation and also poverty reduction, was the highest issue identified by Filipinos.
Kasi sinabi naman ni President Marcos, he was assessing his 100 days, sabi niya, they were busy putting out fires, saka yung top achievements naman daw niya appointing the best and the brightest and creating a functioning government.
No, pero Ed, ano bang konteksto ng functional government as opposed to what?
But also to be fair din to this new administration, you're also looking at a host of other variables that are external in nature. You have the war in Ukraine, you have the peso depreciation because of the dollar, among other things. And you carry over ng mga utang. So these are all, wrapped up together into one big problem, and people, of course, are disappointed.
Yeah, nonetheless, one of the consistent things that people have been giving credit for the administration for was building a solid team coming from different political persuasions, different crossing party lines, professionals.
Well, now the idea of a solid team is
but that was one of the things in particular, and I think this is one of the things that he was alluding to when he referred to a functioning government, in particular the economic team.
The economic team.
Diba? Got high grades from various sectors there. But nonetheless,
Medalla, Balisacan, Jokno, the bigwigs.
And notwithstanding that, ironically, for all of that, it's still the economy that's highest in the hearts and minds of Filipinos. And we'll be speaking. I will be speaking about that first when we speak to our first guest after a short break. Keep it right here on One News.
assailants on board a motorcycle were seen tailing Lapid. A little later, they disappeared from the footage. It was then followed by a series of gunshots. The gunmen took a U-turn to flee from the scene.
Pinapagtagpi-tagpi natin kung itong ating suspect ay yung nakita natin dito sa CCTV footage. Kailangan po kasi ng enhancement dito ng ating anti-cybercrime group. So, in a few days siguro sa mga susunod na araw, medyo maganda po yung maging development.
A 500,000 peso reward is now on the table for information on the killers of veteran broadcaster Percy Lapid.
I'm offering 500,000 of my own money for any information na makakatulong pa. We already have information, pero I'm offering it. Any information, iiwan ko ito sa PNP 500,000 nang sa gano'n ay makatulong.
President Bongbong Marcos has vowed to support and protect media rights.
Under my lead, we will support and protect the rights of the media as they efficiently perform their duty. Whatever difficulties we may encounter from this point on, the government will always be ready to lend an ear and to listen to your concerns and to answer all that you may want to know.
And welcome back to the Chiefs here in One News. President Bongbong Marcos Jr. vows to protect and support media rights under his administration. This commitment comes on the heels of broadcaster Percy Lapid's killing. Let's get the insights from Ronalyn Olea, Secretary General of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, or NUJP. Len, magandang gabi and thank you for joining us. Welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening.
Good evening, the Chiefs. Happy to be back here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Len, it's been quite a while since a journalist was murdered in Metro Manila. I mean, in the past few years, usually sa probinsya yan eh. So people tend to be a bit dismissive, unfortunately, pag hindi taga Metro Manila namamatay. Pero ngayon, very markedly, Metro Manila eh. What does this tell you? Do you see anything here?
Yes, this only goes to show that journalism remains to be a dangerous profession in the Philippines. At the fact that it happened in Metro Manila proves na very, what do you call this, walang takot, no? Very brazen yung attack at malakas ang loob ng perpetrators.
But, we just played back a soundbite from President Bongbong Marcos where he gave assurances that, among other things, that all efforts will be done to resolve the issue. And he also gave guarantees of protection of media rights and respect for the role of media in this country. Your thoughts?
Of course, we welcome his recent statement that yesterday, no? That he is for the protection of media. And we also welcome the order to investigate the killing of Percy Lapid. But of course, we have yet to see if this will be translated into concrete actions. So far, under his administration, NUJP has already recorded 13 incidents of press freedom violations. At dalawa na nga rito yung pagpaslang, aside from Percy Lapid, ay yung taga Negros Oriental who was stabbed to death, Ray Blanco, last September 18.
Hey, Len, you've been monitoring these attacks and violence against journalists and media for a long time. I mean, decades, in fact, since 1986, yung database ng mga civil society organizations monitoring attacks on journalists. And every administration will say, oh, we are of course committed to press freedom. Every administration has said that they will protect and support media rights, as President Marcos is doing now. And kadalasan pagka may mga ganyang mga high-profile na incident, everybody also pledges, iimbestigahan yan. But in your experience, what are very clear, objective indicators of one, of sincerity, and two, of effectivity? How do we gauge kung sincero at effective ang mga commitment ng liderato?
Siyempre, we all have to look at the conviction of the killers and masterminds. And unfortunately, since 1986, according to NUJP database, 197 na ang pinaslang ng mga kasamahan natin sa media. At kung pag-aaralan natin ulit kung ano yung sinasabi ng datos, napakababa ng conviction rate. At ang pinakahuli nga dyan, yung Pamintuan massacre na up to now, hindi pa rin nahuhuling ibang mga perpetrators. So, of course, we welcome any statement, no? We always take it with a grain of salt, and we are hopeful, no, na talagang ma-resolve itong kaso ni Percy Lapid. Napakalaking challenge ito sa bagong administrasyon to prove na may konkretong magaganap. So we are waiting for the 7 days, no? The PNP is given 7 days to produce results, at sana ay talagang magkaroon ng closure ito, hindi lang dun sa gunmen, kung hindi hanggang sa mastermind.
Ms. Olea, nabanggit niyo na nga na it's a new administration, and it's really quite different from the previous one in terms of human rights. Well, at least yun na nakikita natin sa ibang human rights groups, they are seeing some encouraging signs. Ganun din ba yung nakikita niyo? With regard to press freedom, for example.
Yes po, as I have stated earlier, we have documented 13 cases of attacks on the media since Marcos Jr. assumed the presidency. So 2 of these are killings. There have been 4 journalists charged with cyber libel, 1 ordinary libel, 2 were charged with, 2 were red tagged, 1 was denied access to Malacanang, and 2 were victims of red tagging. So wala pa po, 100 days pa lang, meron na tayong 13 incidents. Of course, meron pa yan malamang na hindi pa namin na-monitor. But that is very telling that there are indications that Marcos Jr. is continuing the policy of the Duterte administration with regard to the media.
Pero wala pa siyang sinasabi, wala siyang specific na policy, except yun na nga, sinabi niya kahapon, ngayon lang na, yun na nga, I will answer all you may want to know. Naniniwala ba kayo na under my lead, we will support and protect the rights of the media? Kasi wala naman siyang, unlike the previous president, talagang publicly talagang nakikipag-away siya sa media. At least itong isang to, wala pa naman sinasabing gano'n, and so far, medyo encouraging naman yung mga public pronouncements niya. You think that's a positive sign?
Yung una po, very glaring for us that he did not condemn the killing of Percy Lapid. So disappointing po yan. And it sends the message to perpetrators na bakit siya tahimik doon? Bakit hindi niya kinondena? It could be, it's a statement expected of him as a president. Number 2, when he said that he will answer all the questions, iba po yung reports na nagagather namin from our colleagues, particularly sa Malacanang beat, na finifilter muna yung questions, and there are questions which he refuses to answer. So medyo may disconnect. But of course, we welcome yung promise niya that poprotektahan niya yung media. Pero as to how it will happen, we have yet to see.
Well, then you're also, I understand, the managing editor of Bulatlat. And I do recall nung last part of June, pero panahon ni Pangulong Duterte, technically, several websites were blocked by the NTC, including Bulatlat and Pinoy Weekly. And kahit pa paano, medyo nag-carry over yan into the next administration for a few more weeks. I'm wondering if you've seen any new developments or any new change in attitude by the change in administration as far as that is concerned.
Well, we filed the charges against the NTC, and it resulted to the unblocking of our website. But the case is still ongoing, and we are disappointed that the NTC has not retracted or its memorandum. In fact, when the court issued an injunction order, the ISPs voluntarily complied, meaning the NTC did not order them to implement the court's order. That's why we filed indirect contempt against the NTC. So we're still waiting for the decision. The red tagging still continues. As I said, hindi lang Bulatlat, Pinoy Weekly. We have 2 cases of red tagging of our colleagues in the provinces, at sila talaga mas very risky and very vulnerable yung conditions pa ng mga kasamahan natin sa mga probinsya.
Len, could I just clarify yung situation ng Bulatlat and its website? Sinabi mo kasi it was supposed to be unblocked as per the injunction and the order of the courts, but ultimately the compliance was voluntary on the side of the providers, di ba? Not an order.
Yes.
So what does that mean in practical terms? Is it unblocked? Is it accessible right now? Is it accessible at any given time? Or is it still, shall we say, inconsistent or unstable access to your website?
Now it is accessible to most ISPs, and we are very grateful for the voluntary compliance of internet service providers. No? Kaya nag-file po kami ng indirect contempt kasi medyo delikadong precedent yon na the NTC can just choose to ignore an order from the court. Diba? So we are hopeful that the court will decide in favor of press freedom. Of course, hindi lang to usapin ng Bulatlat, but also other news websites such as Pinoy Weekly and the websites of other progressive organizations maliciously tagged as left-leaning or terrorist-friendly. No, napaka-unfair ng accusations na wala namang evidence na binibigay.
Let me zoom out a bit on the situation of violence against journalists and the media, because as we said, you have been monitoring this. Many groups have been monitoring this since 1986. We've been tracking killings. The Philippines remains, as you always say, quote unquote, one of the deadliest places for journalists anywhere in the world. Now, this November 2022 marks the 10th year, if I'm not mistaken, of the launch of the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. And for that, the Philippines was one of the first to adopt its own national action plan. You're a stakeholder there, and the direction for there is to try to come up with a national mechanism for safety, something that brings government, civil society, media all together on some common plan and direction. But what would you like to see by way of a national action plan or a mechanism that is institutionalized that can ensure that we can somehow lessen, if not totally eradicate, violence against journalists and the free press?
I think this administration should treat the media as what we are. We are not enemies. I think the attacks are coming from the perception that we are here to destroy government, to destroy the reputation of government officials. Our job is to tell the truth. And most of the attacks, for example, red tagging, libel and cyber libel, these are being done by the powers that be in many provinces by the big politicians to harass and intimidate our colleagues. So it should start from that change in mindset in the framework on how they appreciate or treat media's role in a democracy. Kasi ganun lang naman talaga yung gusto natin, di ba? To be able to do our work. Unfortunately, for many government agencies, and in particular for the National Task Force to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict, and for some in the security cluster of the government, they see us as enemies, and that is the problem. Kaya parang, of course, we cooperate with the plan of action. We also talk with government agencies. We want to resolve these cases. We participated initially in the activities with the PT forms, but later on we were frustrated by the lack of action and by the consistent, what do I call that, perception or treatment unrelenting, deliberate efforts to discredit us and demonize us even, di ba? Kaya paano natin ma-expect kung ganun yung mindset nila? And then Marcos Jr. would say that I will listen to you, I will answer all your questions, pero concretely, hindi pa natin yun nararamdaman. Kaya for us, of course, for media organizations, we are doing our part, no? In trying to resolve some of the issues about safety, etc. Pero yung climate of impunity, yung general environment remains to be hostile, even under this new administration.
Len, importante siyempre dyan yung leadership by example, no? During the campaign, the candidate Bongbong Marcos talaga avoided the mainstream media. Pero in the past 100 days, kasi magwa 100 days I'm talking about it. No? Medyo parang nagwa-warm up na siya, no? Medyo nagiging comfortable na, although yung mga one-on-one niya, siyempre doon pa rin sa mga deemed friendly interviewers. Although he gave a wide-ranging interview na with the Associated Press, that in the US, umarap na siya sa Manila Overseas Press Club, na halo-halo din naman yung membership. Do you see any positive trend in what's happening, what you can see now? With regard to his ties with his interaction with mainstream media?
We want that to continue. And paano ba? He should be open in answering legitimate questions. No? Halimbawa yung kanyang Singapore trip. Very frustrating and disappointing that the palace initially refused to comment on that. At nalaman pa ng media dito at ng publiko mula sa social media post. So, if he's saying that he's ready to answer, he should be. And he should do it ASAP.
Malaking role ang pwedeng gawin dyan ng press secretary, no? The new press secretary. Do you have any suggestions kung sakasakali kung ano yung dapat na mga requirements, mga qualifications of the incoming press secretary?
Siyempre po sana someone who values our work in the media, who sees our work as very important in any democratic society. Doon dapat laging magmula. Kasi kung ganun yung mindset ng susunod na press secretary, then I think we can do our job, no? Nang mas matiwasay at wala tayong iniisip na pangamba, walang chilling effect, no? Na kagaya ng nararamdaman natin sa kasalukuyan.
Although, Ms. Len, on the other hand, hindi kasing antagonistic to the media yung bagong Pangulo compared to the previous the previous president. I mean, at least in this case, he's not rallying people against the media. I suppose that's also one variable that we have to also consider.
Yes, I agree. Pero simula nung elections up to now, parang wala naman siyang antagonistic statement, no? Hindi katulad ni Duterte, minumura tayo, etc. Pero siya, parang yung mga trolls, ay yun naman yung umaatake sa atin. At tuloy-tuloy naman yun. So, I'm not sure kung ito ba ay new tactic. But again, wala ring strong statement, no? Halimbawa yung binanggit ko na walang condemnation at all sa pagpatay kay Percy Lapid. Kulang pa din. Parang naghahanap pa tayo ng something very concrete na statement in support of independent media in the Philippines.
Yeah. Speaking of strong statements or strong action, balikan ko yung isang nabanggit ni Ed. Notwithstanding itong latest high-profile killing kay Percy Lapid right here in Metro Manila, we know that the majority of the killings happen, I mean, the farther away you get from urban centers, not just Metro Manila, the deeper you get into the rural areas, tumataas yung risk talaga, especially for community-based journalists and media. What can be done at the local level? That's one. And then two, by way of concrete action and concrete directions, what can the national government do to send that message to local governments that, you know, something has to be done at the national level, but also especially at the local levels?
Of course, local politicians and even the state security forces deployed in the provinces take cue from the leadership. So when a national task force red tags journalists, ramdam po yan hanggang baba. And many of our members in the NUJP sa mga probinsya are being red tagged and monitored by the military and police forces, and there have been cases na ang perpetrators ng attacks ay mga state security forces o kaya local politicians. So how do we stop this? Babalik pa rin po tayo dun sa they have to realize the role of media in a democratic society. No, na hindi tayo kaaway kundi ginagawa natin yung trabaho natin na para ihatid yung katotohanan sa mamamayan. Of course, there will be conflicts when we expose corruption, and many of our colleagues who have been who were slain actually reported about corruption and other scandals, no, in their localities. Kaya parang ang hirap mong sagutin ng tanong, no, kung ano ba yung konkretong pwedeng gawin kung nagmumula yung attacks dun sa mismong mga tao na who we expect should be the ones protecting us. Kaya the recent killing of Percy Lapid only also goes to show na wala halos tayong protection na nararamdaman. Hindi lang journalists, kundi ordinary citizens, no? Para magawa nila ito sa Metro Manila.
Okay. Len, maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Ingat.
Maraming salamat din po.
Len Olea is Secretary General of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. And we'll start up another conversation after the break. Stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. President Marcos sees the Philippines reaching middle-income status by next year and becoming a moderately prosperous country by 2040. But for now, economic indicators are not very inspiring. Let's bring in our next guest, UP School of Economics Assistant Professor JC Punongbayan. Good evening, JC. Welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Professor.
Good evening po sa inyong lahat.
JC, let's continue to your discussing kanina sa big story. Again, of course, the big theme for all of us, first 100 days of the Marcos administration. How does an economist look at it?
Well, it's a mix, Sir Roby, of global factors. na siyang nagpapalala ng inflation rate natin. Nasa 6.9% na ito. This is the worst inflation rate since October 2018, for almost 4 years ago. And if you look at it, actually yung inflation as felt by the poor, it's 6.7%. Paano masasabi na malala ito? Ang target kasi ng gobyerno ay nasa 2 to 4% lang. So very clearly, lagpas-lagpas tayo sa target and kailangan talagang rendahan or we need to bring down the inflation rate because the purchasing power of Filipinos is really eroding in the past couple of months.
But you started off being fair and you started off acknowledging that a lot of these things that are causing inflation are external to us. At the same time, you ended with, pero kailangan rendahan. So how do you do that? Paano mo re-rendahan when most of the factors are coming from outside the country?
Actually, Sir Roby, when you drill down on the inflation statistics, hindi na lang siya international factors din eh. Although a large part of it is still because of, for example, borne by the Russian invasion in Ukraine and other factors in global supply chain problems. Pero when you look at yung core inflation data, so ito yung core, yung inflation rate pag tinanggal natin yung pagkain as well as yung petroleum products, tumataas din siya. So, ang ibig sabihin lang nito ay talagang na-entrench yung inflation sa ating bansa in the sense na maraming mga negosyo ang nagtataas ng kanilang mga presyo. Kahit na hindi na ito tungkol sa pagkain or hindi ito tungkol sa gasolina or diesel. So, ito yung nakakatakot na hanggang tumataas itong core inflation rate ay asahan natin na lalala pa yung sitwasyon at lalo kailangan umaksyon ng gobyerno natin kasi domestic factors medyo lumalaki yung factor ng inflation na dahil sa domestic factors.
Pero sir, zooming into that, yung domestic factors, what's the reason for this continued increase with the domestic factors concerned, and what can still be done about them?
Again, when you look at the inflation data, ang tatlong pinakamalaking contributor to inflation would be food, especially, well, for example, yung meat as well as, well, food and non-alcoholic beverages in general. And then yung sa utilities, lalo na sa kuryente. So yan yung pangalawang factor. And then yung pangatlo doon sa operation ng private vehicles. So ito yung mga pribadong sasakyan, mga kotse, mga motorsiklo, etc. All of these of course apektado nung oil prices, petroleum prices. Pero as I said, hindi na lang yun eh. So for example, kailangan medyo ma-manage ng Marcos administration yung expectations ng mga tao kasi habang lalong tumatagal yung inflation, mas maraming naniniwala na tatagal pa ito at tataasan nila yung presyo ng mga produkto at serbisyo na binibenta nila, which further fuels inflation.
Well, in fact nga dun sa Pulse Asia, sinabi, hindi masyadong masaya mga tao in the way the government is handling inflation. No? Pero sabi naman ni President Marcos, sabi niya, kasi naman yung at least first months niya he has been busy putting out the fires. Pero okay naman daw yung kanyang he appointed the best and the brightest. I think he's talking about his economic team. So ang tanong ko sa'yo, magsa-first 100 days, how would you assess the performance of the administration by way of handling all this economic crisis, multiple agricultural at
Actually, yung current na governor ng Bangko Sentral, si Dr. Medalla, ay dati kong professor and I can attest na isa nga siya sa pinakamagagaling na ekonomista, well, at least that I have met. Pero, to be fair, actually the BSP has been doing its part. For example, tinataasan niya yung interest rate na ibig sabihin mas mahirap ng umutang at pag mas mahirap ng umutang ay mas maraming hindi gaganahan na bumili ng kotse, kondo or gumastos para sa kanilang negosyo. And by doing so, ay marerendahan yung inflation. Pero itong inflation ay dalawang factors ito eh. So merong demand and supply. Yung Bangko Sentral pwede lang niyang apektuhan yung inflation dulot ng demand. Pero yung inflation na dulot ng supply, for example, yung kakulangan ng asukal or bigas or kung anumang agricultural commodity, wala na ito sa sakop ng Bangko Sentral. So kailangan umaksyon yung mga ahensya ng gobyerno na maaring may mga polisiya na gawin para pataasin yung produksyon or mag-import ng mas marami para hindi ganun kataas ang presyo ng pagkain. So supply and demand ang dapat tutukan.
JC, sundutin ko lang ng konti. When you say na meron mga polisiyang pwedeng gawin, is that the same as saying only because we're assessing the past 100 days. Is that the same as saying may mga polisiyang sana nagawa ng mas maaga pa?
Well, Sir Robin, nakita natin for example sa sugar importation fiasco na initially yung agriculture officials gusto nila ng additional 300,000 metric tons ng asukal. Pero nakita natin yung napolitika siya essentially. And after discussions with traders and millers of sugar, nabawasan yung import order to 150,000. Na if you think of it, kung mas malaki yung i-import natin na asukal ay mas walang shortage na mangyayari at yung sugar prices will be abated. Pero ayun parang nakita natin yung impact ng politika. Pagdating doon, for example, sinabi rin ni Pangulong Marcos na food sovereignty ang itutulak niya. If you remember during the campaign, gusto niya na mas umasa tayo sa domestic production. Pero actually, ang hirap na promise nun kasi for the longest time, agriculture has really been contributing less and less to total output. So merong mga structural problems na hindi mo talaga masasagot in the first 100 days. And the best you can do, for example, would be palliative measures, for example, greater imports. Pero even that, parang hindi niya magawa. So, ayun parang siguro mag-appoint na lang ng full-time na agriculture secretary. I think kailangan tutukan talaga yung agriculture issues. It's a full-time job in itself and the president might have some difficulty multitasking. He better appoint a full-time agriculture secretary in my opinion.
Well, sabi nga niya, ang wish daw niya, nasasabi niya lang this week I think it's a reiteration of his previous wish, no? He doesn't want any Filipino daw to go hungry. You think this is viable, this is feasible within the next 6 years? Considering na pati yung ibang mga sectors sa agriculture, sinasabi may mga bagay na hindi natin daw kayang maging self-sufficient. I don't know if that's a self-defeatist assessment, pero ikaw, anong tingin mo? Is that possible? No Filipino will go hungry. Wish ko lang.
Ma'am Ami, for the longest time, itong hunger, stunting, malnutrition, napakalahing problema na sa ating bansa. And I'm afraid that until we are able to see greater reforms in the agriculture sector, yung food security natin very weak, yung food security sa ating bansa. And itong kakulangan ng agricultural commodities, this feeds into food insecurity. And magkakaroon to ng long-term implications. For example, paano yung learning crisis natin that might worsen kung hindi sapat yung kinakain ng mga bata habang sila ay lumalaki. So far-reaching yung implications ng failure to address food security. So kailangan yung mga food shortages and for example yung inflation in itself. Kasi kapag mataas yung inflation, paano makakabili ng mga basic commodities ang mga tao, especially yung mahihirap. So parang isa domino effect na kapag itong food issues natin ay hindi masolve, maraming mga repercussions down the line.
But you think it's an attainable aspiration for the next 6 years?
Well, insofar as the shortages, for example, in agriculture are quite dire, and I mean, this will not be solved overnight. For example, may mga suggestions ng farm-to-market roads, pero kailangan mas strategic yung farm-to-market roads, hindi siya ganun kadali. And paano, for example, yung land reform, parang kaya bang ma-reverse yung losses from land reform o yung inability to maximize the benefits from land reform in the next 6 years. So many structural problems have accumulated over the decades in agriculture. Kaya naman, when you look at the data, halos walang contribution yung agriculture sa total production ng ating economy. In terms of economic growth, halos negligible yung kanyang contribution. We're a service-driven economy and then also industry is quite big, pero agriculture, napaguhulihan talaga siya. So when it comes to hunger, I think magiging mahirap na gawing zero ang hunger. I think he committed to ensure that there will be not one more Filipino who will be hungry. Pero the point is to actually reduce the extent and magnitude of hunger rather than just the promise na hindi siya mag-worsen.
Yes, sir, going back to what you mentioned a while ago, yun lang kasi I've been hearing it for the past 3.5 decades, the need for better planned farm-to-market roads and yung a more rational agrarian reform program. But these are also programs and concepts that have been emphasized by every administration. In the end, it boils down to how do you operationalize it or how do you implement it in such a way that it will work. So yun po how do we do that? I mean, like I said nga, 3.5 decades of the same concepts being tossed around by successive administrations.
I think, Sir Ed, to begin with, to be able to address these issues, kailangan naintindihan mo siya So it's really quite crucial to appoint someone who knows the issues like the back of his or her hand. Ang problema kasi parang the president is coming into the agriculture sector, parang meron pa siyang learning curve that he needs to hurdle before he can even imagine, for example, out of the box solutions. Or, siguro yung political will din papasok doon na parang doon sa sugar importation fiasco. Nakita natin na isang conversation lang or just a series of conversations ay parang na bago na yung agriculture policy when it comes to importation. And many economists, for example, who have been monitoring issues in agriculture were quite disappointed doon sa parang naging scapegoats yung ilang agriculture officials who have been working with these issues for a very long time, and yet parang naging political scapegoat pa sila. So I think ganun parang of course there will be political issues when it comes to agriculture, pero siguro kailangan mas manaig yung evidence-based policy making.
JC, sabi ni President Marcos, one of the achievements in the first 100 days is he has built a functional government. A lot of people are asking, we don't know what that means. We don't know what a functional government is as opposed to what. But let me just ask you on the positive side of it. What are indicators for you, objectively, that, okay, this is, let's say, more functional in government? I presume he was just talking. It's fair to say that the reference point was the previous administration, previous policies, previous practices, and so on. Are there things that for you are, okay, let's talk functionality. This one, I think, is actually more functional in the first 100 days.
I think, Sir Roby, we have to credit as well the bureaucracy. So that even if there's a change in leadership at the very highest levels, nandiyan yung mga experts in various fields who have long been working in the bureaucracy. So nandun yung institutional knowledge and memory so that they can continue many of the programs that have been started by past administrations. And I think another thing that's going for the current administration is that yung economy natin fundamentally, if you take away yung mga short-term crisis natin, ay meron talaga siyang tinatahak na trajectory upward. The problem is, as I mentioned earlier, kailangan makabalik tayo sa pre-pandemic trajectory ng ating ekonomiya. Pero merong headwinds, for example, yung learning crisis natin. 9 out of 10 children of age 10 ang hindi nakakabasa ng dapat nababasa nila at that age. And then, of course, yung potential energy crisis by 2027. Not a lot of people are talking about this. Pero kapag maubos yung natural gas reserves ng Malampaya, we are seeing a series of blackouts and brownouts that can be a drag on economic growth in the years to come. And we have very little opportunity to invest in, for example, yung importation of liquefied natural gas that can supplant the natural gas that will be depleted from Malampaya. So all of these things, learning crisis, potential energy crisis, and then yung continuing crisis in hunger, ang daming problema And we need the president to focus more on these issues and not be distracted, for example, dun sa mga parties as we have seen and other personal things. I mean, there's so much to do, and he needs to drill down on these issues.
And nabanggit mo yung getting back to pre-pandemic levels. Do you have latest projections on that? At the rate things are going, both in terms of momentum as well as drags. Ano na yung latest scenarios and that you're building to say that, when can we expect to get back to pre-pandemic levels?
Para makabalik tayo, Sir Roby, sa pre-pandemic levels by 2028, the end of the Marcos administration, GDP needs to grow by more than 9%. But on an annual basis. The problem is, ang GDP growth natin naglalaro lang sa 7.4% o nung first quarter nasa 8%. Kulang yung sa kailangan nating growth rate para makabalik agad doon sa pre-pandemic trajectory. Sinabi ni President Marcos sa SONA niya na he intends GDP to grow by at most 7.5% by this year and at most 8% starting next year until 2028. But even if this comes into fruition, actually when you project the data, 2034 pa tayo makakabalik sa pre-pandemic levels ng GDP. So ibig sabihin sa katapusan pa ng administration na kasunod ng Marcos administration, ganun kalalim yung economic scars, ganun tayo nag-lag behind because of the pandemic. Kailangan pang siguro dapat mas ambisyoso pa nga sila than what they had already targeted.
Well, short term lang. Dahil ang Russia is not about to withdraw from Ukraine, tuloy-tuloy pa rin yan. And the US Fed, tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung pagtaas ng interest rate to tame inflation, napakataas ng inflation sa kanila. So lalakas pa rin yung dollar, hihina yung peso, tataas pa rin ng mga presyo. And in the meantime, winasak ni Puntar din yung ating bigas. What are your projections for the rest of the year? Merry Christmas ba tayo o ano?
Ma'am Ami, some analysts have been saying that we are facing a rice shortage by the end of this year on account of, for example, yung fertilizers. Nag-triple ang presyo ng fertilizers and many farmers have actually scaled back production of rice dito sa planting season, for example. Doon sa importation, for example, meron ding headwinds kasi some of the countries that we get rice from, parang hindi na sila kasing willing na mag-export ng rice sa atin. So all of these factors combined, we're looking at that potential rice shortage by the end of this year, which will necessarily fuel inflation in the coming months. So I'm afraid na itong spell of high inflation is, the end is not yet in sight, and we have to brace for the next couple of months.
Paano yung growth projection niya na 7.5? Sa iba, mga high 5 lang and low 6% lang yung sa ibang analyst. In your case, ano yung projection growth by the year end?
Ma'am Ami, I don't have a model by myself, pero some analysts have been saying, for example, na siguro makakalagpas naman tayo ng 6% growth. Merong mga revisions recently, for example, from the World Bank, the IMF, and medyo steady yung kanilang growth projections for the Philippines this year. But the problem is, as I mentioned, kailangan tinatarget natin 9% annually para makabalik tayo sa pre-pandemic level by 2028. So kung naglalaro lang ng 6% or 7%, it may seem impressive at par siya doon sa growth figures natin before the pandemic, pero it's not nearly enough to go back to pre-pandemic, for us to go back to pre-pandemic levels very soon.
Okay, JC Punong Bayan, maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Salamat.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
JC, of course, is with the UP School of Economics. And that's it for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. I'm Roby Alampay.
I'm Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.